All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on managing multiple compliance security programs with ease. My name is Andrea Britt. I'm Senior Director of Compliance Services for the HITRUST team at Accorian. And with me today, I have Hazela, who heads the General Compliance Services at Accorian. I'm thrilled to be your co-host along with for our session today. Should you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to include them in the Q&A section that you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer those questions at the end of our webinar, time allowed. So before we move ahead, let me give you a brief background on Accorian services. So Accorian has worked on over 400 engagements of compliance consulting projects across HITRUST, PCI DSS, HIPAA, ISO 27001, SOC 2, NIST, and GDPR, among others. We are a HITRUST assessor firm, and we have multiple other certifications. We serve the health, financial, and e-commerce industries. So let's go ahead and dive into today's webinar, Managing Multi-Compliance Security Programs with Ease. I'm going to hand it over to Om. Go ahead and take it on.
All right. Thanks, Andrea. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. So before we begin, I just wanted to set the context for today's webinar. So like we all know that these days, organizations are facing numerous challenges when running multi-compliance programs, right? And if you see, one of the major challenge is staying compliant because there are so many changes happening in terms of standards, frameworks, regulations. So it is very difficult for an organization to keep a pace with that, right? And this put organization at risk, being non-compliant, and that's a big risk, right? So in such cases, we need an approach on customized framework, which can overcome these challenges and ensure that organizations meet their compliance goals effectively and efficiently. That's what we are going to talk about in this webinar. So whether you are a compliance professional, IT leader, or executive, this webinar aims to equip you with the knowledge and insights needed to navigate compliance with confidence and ease. So let's get started. So what I'll do today, we'll talk about on these agenda points. So like we all are aware, we understand how the organization run the singular program, right? Like executing a single compliance framework. That is one. We'll also discuss about the current compliance challenges, what all trends are these days in terms of the compliance. We'll also touch base on the multi-compliance challenges, because if you see, when organizations are going for multiple compliance frameworks, they are going to implement the multiple compliance. So there are a lot of challenges. Okay, we'll touch base that, and then we'll try to understand what is the solution to overcome those challenges. That is nothing but our ICF. So ICF stands for Integrated Compliance Framework, right? Then we'll talk about the benefits of ICF, how and organizations are implementing those ICF. And I'll also touch base on a case study. We'll discuss the pitfalls when organizations are going to implement the ICF and what all consideration they should keep in their mind when they are going to implement the ICF, which is a framework. Then I'll also touch base on the Accorian approach to manage multi-compliance frameworks, and finally the conclusion. All right. Okay, so to begin with, we should understand that how companies run individual compliance program. Okay, so if you see, companies typically run individual compliance program just to ensure the adherence to the specific laws, regulations, industry standards, whatever it's applicable to their operations. Okay, and the implementation of these programs will vary based on their industry. Like if they are in fintech or they are in health industry, that is one thing. Secondly, it will also depend on the size of the organization, what size they have. It is a mid size, small size, large size organization. And the most important is the nature of its business. what kind of business or operations they are having. So what the companies do if they have to go for a single certification or the attestation, they will have the company, they will appoint a dedicated compliance team, right? That team will conduct a thorough analysis of applicable standards, what laws, regulations, industry standards are applicable to the organization based on which can impact their operations, right? Once they do that, they will create a policy procedure. They will develop the comprehensive policies, procedures, and which can meet the regulatory requirements, right? Once they do that, they will go and conduct the risk assessment just to identify and prioritize the potential compliance risk. And obviously, once they do that, they will go and remediate those risks as well. Once this is done, the companies will also do the monitor and their implementation, like control implementation, that they do with the help of internal reviews, assessments, and inspections, just to identify whether they are not deviating from the standards which for which they are supposed to do it, that is applicable to them, right? Then companies also have the incident response. Now they have already set up everything. They are monitoring the compliance program. They are auditing also in between. So they also have the incident response plan, so that in case they don't address a particular instance of non-compliance, they can immediately respond to that, right? And of course, the regular communication to the management, to the executive oversight, roles and responsibilities are absolutely defined, and this is all are achieved with the help of tools or technology. So if you see an overall picture where organization is doing from establishing a compliance team to with the use of technology, and they get a certification. So at the end, they have one targeted certification. Okay. And to achieve another certification, they have to start the same process again and again. So if they have to comply with the multiple compliance framework. Okay. So ultimately you see a singular compliance program, it will give you only a certification, but it don't aid in running a secure program. So here organizations are getting a certification, they're getting it because they are targeting one certification. But overall, if you see they want to go for a multiple certifications, multiple compliance framework, that doesn't help here. Okay, now let's talk about and discuss some complexities in today's environment. So if you see, uh, there are a lot of I would say the 75% of executives, they say their organizations are too complex. Why? Because these days, if you see, organizations are running their operations from cloud. They are using multiple tools. Okay, they have different business units, different geographical spread, and also different scopes. Okay, and they also have to coordinate with various stakeholders. So it's a very complex environment which you see in terms of compliance. At the same time, there are a lot of changes happening on the compliance framework side. Like we all know that in last few years, take an example of PCI. Like PCI changed from version 3.2.1 to version 4. ISO got changed from 2013 to 2022 version, and also there were changes happened with the NIST framework. There were changes in HITRUST and somewhere at SOC 2 as well. So you see the keeping a pace with these changes and then comply with them is definitely a challenge. And these days, if you see, 70% organizations, they need to show compliance adherence with more than 3 to 4. I'll take an example. Suppose there is a small organization, so maybe small organization will go for a one or two certification. They have to go for a one or two framework. Mid size might go for a 3 to 4 certificate based on the business, their operations, and where they are located and those things, because there are local regulations, law requirements also come into play. Large organization, even they go for a average 5 to 6 compliance frameworks. And as I mentioned, each has its own considerations and trends. Like I was just going through in the last week, PCI version 4. the minimum password length is supposed 12 characters. Earlier it was 7 characters. So some control requirement change. The lockout requirement was no more than 10 failed attempts. And previously it was 6 attempts. So if you see on a PCI standpoint, the control requirement has changed. And if you don't meet those requirements, you will be lacking behind and that control implementation and so on. Okay. So this makes adherence even hard and very stringent. Okay, so let's quickly go over the compliance challenges. If an organization have to comply with multiple compliance frameworks. Okay, all right. So, like I have already discussed, the first and the most important, like the challenge for the multi-compliance is the diverse standard landscape, right? Organization needs to comply with multiple standards, and each standard often comes with its own set of controls, the reporting obligations and nuances. So if you take example of a SOC 2 ISO, they have a different control requirement. They have a different reporting obligations and those things. That is one. Second, in terms of controls, so if you see the controls of different these standards, some you will find the common controls, right? And some will be conflicting controls. So you see the overlapping controls and some conflicting controls that make it challenge so that in the alignment. And if you implement those controls uh, cohesively, it is very difficult. It's a challenge, right? Next come in terms of resources. So if an organization is going for a multiple compliance framework, there are a lot of resources in terms of finance, in terms of human, in terms of technology. So for example, if an organization is going for a PCI certification, so PCI QSA or a specialized person is required to execute that project. Okay, if an organization needs some tool or a different resources, that is also a resource constraint, and it is a resource intensiveness. So organization has to invest in that. So that's a burden, that's a challenge. All right. Another challenge is continuous changes and updates. Like I already mentioned, a lot of changes happening on the compliance side, on the legal and regulatory requirements. So keep a pace with that is also a challenge. Uh, Another challenge is the audit and reporting burdens. Like if an organization is going for a multiple frameworks, they have to conduct a separate audits for each compliance requirement, right? That require resources, time, and they will have a different reports and evidence collection that creates administrative burdens, and it is a redundant effort, right? So that is another challenge. Next, and the most important, is the non-compliance and the penalties. So if an organization is failing to meet any of the compliance requirement, they have to pay hefty penalties. Okay, there will be legal issues, and it would lead to a damage to the organization's reputation. That is not good. So you see the multi-compliance challenges in the siloed programs. Okay, that leads to a compliance burden and audit fatigue. So to overcome these challenges, we need something, maybe an approach of framework, uh, like an integrated compliance framework that can meet the challenges of multi-framework control requirements, and that we'll talk about in a couple of slides.
So, can we then call out lack of standardization as one of the challenges that with multi-compliance frameworks?
Good question. Yes. Of course, Andrea, yeah, it's a challenge. So when you're dealing with the multiple compliance frameworks, the lack of standardization is that it refers to a uniformity and consistency across these various compliance requirements. For instance, PCI DSS that deal with the cardholder data, right? While you see the GDPR, it emphasizes on the data privacy. So this disparity in requirements, it lead to the confusion and the complexity when you are trying to align with multiple standards together, right? That is one
Right.
thing. At the same time, there are different terminologies and different definitions are used by frameworks. That is also is one of the challenge in related to the standardization. So yes, of course, it's a challenge.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. So let's talk about and discuss the ICF, which is Integrated Compliance Framework. So what is ICF? Okay. So ICF, it is a standardized approach which is used in the compliance management that integrates multiple regulatory requirements, controls, and best practices into a single framework. So ICF is a single framework where all the framework's control requirements are merged and a centralized repository of harmonized controls are created from these regulations and standards and frameworks. Okay. So when you're creating this, it simplifies the process of the mapping and alignment of the controls from these regulations. Okay, and what organizations can do? They can leverage this ICF and they can manage all the compliance applicable to them frameworks efficiently. They can reduce the duplication of efforts and also optimize their resources. That is the plus point of ICF. And so let's explore some of the benefits of ICF, what exactly it provides in terms of compliance. All right. So you see, when an organization is going for a multi-compliance framework, they will have to do the multiple audits. Like, so consolidated audit is one of the benefit of ICF, where rather than conducting separate audits for each, it aims to streamline the process by examining collective compliance efforts. So you don't have to do the audit again and again. You do the audit once and all frameworks will be compliant because you have the ICF in place. You have the control mapping in place at the back end. That is one. Second benefit is in terms of the controls. Like uh, there is a requirement of ISO or SOC 2, suppose in case of, for example, a DLP or maybe access review, or you can call it password complexity. All right. So if I have only one control which is meeting the requirement of all these three frameworks, that reduce the duplication and redundancy of the control, right? So that is another benefit. Next benefit of ICF is the evidence collection. Like, since you know I need these many evidence for those frameworks or standards, you will collect the only set of those evidence, and those evidence will be suffice to meet the requirement of your standards which you want to go for. So it ensure the efficiency, it reduce the redundancy in monitoring your compliance activities, right? Another benefit of ICF is the resource allocation. So again, it goes back to the consolidated audits. You don't have to do the audit again and again. It means you don't have to uh, allocate resources in terms of finance, human, and other things. So it reduces your resource effort, it reduces your cost as well, that will come in at the end. uh, that is another benefit. Next is the risk management. Now you see how this ICF is created. You have the control mapping, control alignment. So an organization already know that I have these many controls implemented. Organization have implemented these many controls, that they can easily see the gap, what is missing. Okay, they can find out the inconsistencies in the compliance requirement, and they can immediately go for the remediation and do the risk management. So their risk management program, by ensuring the compliance, the control gaps, addressing those gaps, they have a more holistic compliance posture, right? There is another and very good benefit of ICF. And of course, the next is the streamlined security program. It is well defined with the help of tool or technology. And the last but not the least is the cost saving. So cost saving also in the compliance management, you don't have to use more resources in terms of finance and other things, and it gives you a good minimize the need for duplicative efforts and the associated cost. So that is another benefits. Now I have one thing here, like see, we have seen the benefits, we have seen what is ICF. So we have understood that it is an integrated compliance framework, it has a harmonized controls, it has a control alignment, and whatever organizations wants to go for the framework uh, to meet those compliance requirements, they can go and use the ICF. But if an organization wants to implement ICF, what they should do, what is the approach? So let's talk about the next slide. Okay, so I'll show you the approach how an organization can go and implement the ICF. So we'll start with the identification of applicable standards and frameworks. So organizations should identify what all regulatory requirement, frameworks, standards are applicable to them. And based on that, for example, if an organization wants to go for a SOC 2, PCI, or HIPAA in that case, so they will identify, okay, these are the frameworks which are applicable to them. They have to meet the requirement of these frameworks or standards, right? Once they do that, they have to go for and define the priorities of the framework, like based on their business operations. They have to define the scope, like in terms of ISO, they have to define these are the department, these are the areas and locations will be part of the scope. Similarly for SOC 2, similarly for the HIPAA or PCI, where if PCI is straightforward, where you are storing, processing, and transmitting cardholder data, that will be in scope. So you define the scope and the priorities based on your identified standards and framework, which you have done in the first step. Now the next step is it's a mapping of controls. So you take the controls of all these three frameworks. I'm just taking three because I've just picked up the example. I'll talk about more in the case study as well. So you see what the organization should do. They will consolidate controls by mapping the control requirements from these diverse compliance frameworks, and they will form a standardized set of controls. Okay, so now I have the set of controls from all these three frameworks. All right, then I'll do the gap analysis, because the organization already have the implemented controls, and I'll see out of these many controls, how many controls are not implemented in terms of implementation, in terms of process, in terms of documentation. So organization should do the gap analysis. Once that is done, then they should design an integrated compliance framework. That is nothing but they integrate the controls, process, and documentation across these multiple regulations. Okay, so same, the harmonized control at the back, and you have the common process and documentation for these frameworks. Okay, then organizations should implement controls and processes based on your ICF which you have formed in the step 4. All right. Once you do that, at the same time, the organization should define the standardized policies. Because if you see, you take example of ISO, SOC 2, HITRUST, or HIPAA, you can't have the different set of policy and procedure for all, right? You will have a one set of policies, procedures, standardized documentation, where you can give the reference of the control of all the framework or standards, right? So the documentation is also a very important part when you're going or implementing ICF in the organization, right? Next step is the technology integration, where uh, organizations should deploy a compliance management tool and a software just to facilitate the documentation, the monitoring, because automation is the key today's environment. And if you have things in place and manually, if you're trying to monitor, it's very difficult for a human being. So organizations should deploy a management tool, compliance management tool, and they should ensure that the tools support the integration from different frameworks, and it should give the real-time visibility into those compliance status. Like if an organization is bound to go for ISO SOC 2, they should be able to see, okay, where do I stand as in terms of controls, in terms of domains, where am I lacking, what is my overall security posture. So that the compliance management tool will help with that. All right. Now, once this is done, the training and communication is also play a very important role, because if you see the employees, they are not aware like what is happening. If you don't tell them that this is my framework, the compliance team, they should go and just tell the uh, different department stakeholders, and they should communicate clearly the importance and the benefits of adopting a ICF, that this is how we have adopted ICF, these many controls are required to be implemented, and it belongs to the respective departments and the stakeholders. So the training and communication play a very important role here. Now, next step should be the audit readiness and the reporting part. So suppose once everything is done, you have communicated, things are implemented, you have a tool, but you should regularly conduct, the organization should regularly conduct the assessment and the audits, because there are, if the organizations are not doing that, they will not keep a pace of the changes which are happening in the control framework, right? So use assessment findings. In case they do the assessment, they will be ready for any audit. That is number one. Secondly, these assessment findings, they can use it, and they can they will have an informed decision, and they can prioritize the remediation effort, because it all depends on the budget as well. If organization finds that there are few things which they cannot do in this Q1, they can plan for the Q3 or Q4. That actually they have a planned effort based on the current security posture and the decision which we have taken. So audit readiness and reporting is another aspect. Next, it comes to the governance and oversight, where uh, it should be clearly defined the roles and responsibility for oversight of the ICF program. Okay, if we do that, it ensures the ongoing alignment and the effectiveness of the program. So if nobody is monitoring like what is happening on the compliance side, and the roles and responsibilities are not defined, so organization may go in a different direction, and that might lead to a confusion, and that will not create a very uh, robust program in terms of the compliance. So these were the implementation approach for the ICF for an organization going for a multi-compliance framework.
Hey, so you touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you go a little bit more into the role that technology or tools play in supporting of the implementation of the ICF, excuse me?
Oh, okay. Okay, so you want to understand what is the role of technology and tools play. Okay, fine.
Yes.
So, Andrea, it's a good question. So, like I told you, the technology plays a very crucial role in supporting an ICF implementation. Okay, so if suppose organization have a tool where you have implemented the ICF, so what all you will get? The most important thing, you will get the mapping compliance controls. So mapping of controls is one thing which you will get. That is one. Second, the automation and monitoring. Suppose our organization has already implemented on the tool. Okay, so automatically it will give you the uh, changes, whatever is happening. It can automatically take once you are giving input to the tool. That is one. Secondly, the monitoring, the sustenance part. Once you have done everything on a tool, you can easily do the monitoring. The sustenance is little bit easier on the tool side. That is second. Third, it will also give you the streamlined process. So the communication part, like you have to, like I've told you, you have to inform the team, the department, and streamline the communication, and also collaboration across the department. That is easier on a tool. Once you explain as part of the training program, they will understand, okay, this is my task which I have to do in terms of the ISO engagement, in terms of the SOC 2 engagement. So it's a pretty streamlined process. That is third. Next, we can also have a real-time updates and adjustment. So any changes happening real time, that can also be very useful when we go for the any tool and technology to implement ICF. I hope that makes sense and clear your doubt.
It does. Thank you. So ultimately, then, how can organizations measure the success of their ICF implementation?
Oh, okay. So, like organization can measure the success of their ICF implementation by checking few things, like there should be a reduction of cost and effort. Their cost should have been reduced on the compliance side, right? Their effort should have been reduced. So if you see it on the resource standpoint, there should be a reduction 100%. Okay, that is one. Second, uh, they should have, their process should be improved. There should be efficiency in the compliance process. Okay, earlier when they were not having implemented ICF, they will be running for each and every compliance separately. That is not the efficient way. So once they have the ICF implementation, the process should be streamlined. That is second. Uh, Third, I can think of the consistency. Like they will be meeting, there will be a meeting, regulatory, they will be meeting regulatory requirements on the consistency. So you see, if there are changes in the regulatory requirements, they will easily adapt to those changes. So they will have a consistency in the changes and adaptability towards the changes in the regulatory requirements. That is another thing. The last thing, the positive feedback. Like, how do you assess your organization is already having a good compliance posture, okay, and having a good ICF implementation, and you are good on the compliance side. Only the auditor, who the third party, the external person, can come and just tell you, boss, this is the feedback. These are the positive feedback. These are the negative feedback. If they give a positive feedback from auditors, it means you are on a right track and you have measured the success of your ICF implementation. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea. All right. So now let's talk about the case study where I have picked up the case study on three framework. I have just picked up randomly, like in case an organization that is operating in the health industry, right? It's a health company, okay, that faces complex compliance challenges in aligning with HIPAA, HITRUST, and SOC 2. So what I have done, I've divided there are challenges which organization will face if an organization is going for these three certification and attestation. That is one. Second, what approach they will follow for particular challenge, and what will be the key results or the KPIs. Okay. So let's start with the challenge. So first challenge is the comply with all these three standards or frameworks. Like, so I'll just pick up these three individually, then we'll go ahead on the other approach. So let's see, HITRUST. So HITRUST, it provides a one-stop shop, right? Uh, we all know that it is integrating best practices from HIPAA, ISO, NIST, and other frameworks. So it has a lot of controls from these frameworks. So that, if you see, it reduces the audit fatigue and streamline compliance. So if you have a HITRUST already in place, there are a lot of controls you will find fall in place. It will be very less effort if you any other compliance framework. If you want to, if you already organization is already HITRUST certified, that is one. Second, HIPAA. So HIPAA sets the legal foundation for protecting patient privacy and data security. So HIPAA mainly focus on the patient, the privacy data, and the security of the data. So understanding its requirement is very crucial for any healthcare organization. And you see, the HITRUST CSF, it includes the HIPAA security rule controls, and that simplifies the compliance efforts for any covered entity. So any covered entities is going for a HIPAA, and they have the already have the HITRUST, so it is very easy for them to go for that, and you can easily achieve that HIPAA certification, HIPAA compliance, right? Now coming to the SOC 2. So SOC 2 goes beyond security. So it focuses on the internal controls and the trust service principles like security, availability, confidentiality, and privacy. So if you see here, the challenge is the company aims to establish an integrated approach. Like it wants to have all these three, and at the high level, if you see, they want to address the data security, the privacy, and also the service reliability across these frameworks, right? That is one challenge. Second challenge is the data security on the privacy compliance side, because if you see the HITRUST and the HIPAA, they focus and they mandate the dual focus on the data security and privacy. Okay, that poses a challenge in implementing and satisfy the requirement of both the frameworks. Uh, Additionally, we also have the SOC 2 that gives and asks for the system reliability and availability. So we have the data security, privacy, and the system reliability is and maintaining the compliance with that is another challenge, right? The next challenge, I have listed out few challenges. There could be more, okay, but I thought I should touch upon in the case study, like these are the major challenges organizations are facing these days. The next challenge is towards the vendor management and the third party compliance. So collaborating with the various vendors and third party service providers, it adds complexity to compliance effort. So company must ensure that their vendors alignment with the requirement of HIPAA, HITRUST. Like if organization is onboarding a vendor, okay, and they have to have the acknowledgement or sign on the privacy document, okay, so that because by the privacy rule of HIPAA, they should, it is mandatory, correct? So So vendor management and third party is also another challenge. And the most important and the tricky challenge, I would say, is a different time frame for all compliance framework. So if you see, there are a lot of organizations, they have a different anniversary and the time frame for implementation of those frameworks. One organization is wanted to go somewhere in July for HITRUST, January, SOC, and so on. So if you see the different time frame and alignment of these compliance framework is a daunting task for any organizations, right? So what is the approach? So if you see the approach, I'll fall back to the same, like we should have a integrated compliance team. So there should be one team that is a dedicated team, and it has experts from HIPAA, HITRUST, and SOC 2. Like they are generally aware about these frameworks, okay, and that this team collaborates and develop an integrated compliance framework. What does that mean? They aligns the requirement from the standard and create a centralized repository of controls for that organization to comply with. That is one. Second, uh, to meet the data privacy and security requirement, they should have and conduct the risk assessment, and the risk assessments are conducted regularly, okay, to identify the vulnerabilities and then prioritize the remediation. So risk assessment is done. So if you correlate this with my ICF approach, it is same. So they have formed the ICF team, they conducted the risk assessment, they also formulated the vendor compliance program, so that there is a alignment uh, between the vendors, third party, and the requirement of these three frameworks and standards. Okay. Now, coming to the alignment of time frame and efforts. So this is a very tricky thing where our organization should plan very carefully, and there is a lot of coordination and the resource allocation is required, because all the compliance have a deadlines. Okay, and organization, they don't want to compromise and the quality of implementation, and they should prioritize the compliance efforts. So I would recommend that the organization should have they should leverage the tools, the automation tools, to streamline compliance process, so that they can meet the challenge of the effort, and also the time frame they can manage with that, the automation as a part of sustenance, other things. So once they meet those challenges, they follow this approach and overcome these challenges. What are the result? Ultimately, what they will get? Okay, so they will have since they formed the ICF, they will have the integrated compliance framework, and that will have the cohesive approach on data security, privacy, and reliability, which was the aim of all these three standards and frameworks. At the same time, it also enhances the organization's data security measures, like the protection of sensitive health information. HIPAA, HITRUST, they all look for the health information, and they also ensure that the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of patient data is maintained, right? And it this approach will also give the ensure that the patient can access the secure and reliable telehealth services. They are confident in the protection of their health information. Okay, so that is another result which we'll get once we follow this approach. And organization will also have the vendor ecosystem adherence, like since they are following the process, and they have the compliance program which proves successful with the company's vendor and third party partners alignment. I think they will have an ecosystem in place, and they will not fail in this thing. But yes, the regular audits of these is required, because if you see the organizations, they miss out on the third party or the vendor alignment, because there are a lot of vendors and third party we onboard and then they move out. So they have to be removed from the ecosystem. The ecosystem should be robust, and only vendors organization wants to onboard, they should be there, right? Now, the another result will be the reduction of time and efforts. So, since you have implemented the ICF, in any case, you will get the significant reduction in compliance efforts and cost. So, by consolidating the compliance requirements and streamlining process, you have reduced the duplication of efforts, and also it leads to the efficiency of a program. So in this case study, if you see, the organization has shown they have created the integrated and well coordinated strategy to meet the diverse requirement of multiple compliance frameworks in the healthcare technology sector. So this is a overall case study on meeting these requirements. Right now, okay, so we discuss about the ICF and we discuss about the approach of implementation. We also touch base on the case study if an organization wants to go for all these three certification and the frameworks. But there are few pitfalls, like organizations want to implement the ICF, but there are few issues they might miss on. Okay, and for that, there are few considerations they should keep in a bucket, like if they miss out, they should follow this judiciously. Like, for example, uh, the understanding of requirement. If an organization is not able to understand the specific regulatory requirements and standards which are applicable, I don't think they can reach to a effective compliance framework. Like, it won't be, the effort will won't not be that good. So the organization should consider a thorough analysis of the regulation standards. How they will do it? They can hire a legal guy. They can also hire a compliance experts so that they can guide the organization what all regulatory and standards are applicable to them. That is one. Second, uh, documentation part. So if you see, if an organization is not following the best practices and they're not documenting the policy, procedure, SOPs, and they are not able to produce those documentation to the auditors and regulators, so that's another pitfall. And for that, organizations should consider the robust documentation process. What do I mean with that? Like, they should have a centralized repository of all the activities. Like, if there is a change in the policy, the tracking should be there. The policy change happened. The risk assessment is happening every 6 months or yearly. Like, yearly is the best practice. So whatever happened in the earlier, it should be documented, and those risks should be remediated, and other compliance activities. So that is another pitfall and the consideration. The next one is the lack of stakeholder involvement. So if you see, in the organization, if the stakeholders are not involved, like legal, IT, compliance, and other business units, if they are not involved, uh, they are not giving their input on in terms of framework, and they are not aligned with the organization's overall goals and objectives. That is a big pitfall. Okay, in that case, the organization should consider cross-functional team involvement by the respective stakeholders from different departments. They should be accountable. Like I mentioned earlier, there should be roles and responsibilities defined. There should be oversight, and organizations should have identify a person with each department they can give their perspective, which can be considered during the ICF implementation. Okay. The next one is the inadequate risk assessment. Like, in if an organization is overlooking critical compliance risk and vulnerabilities, that is definitely a pitfall, and the organization should conduct a thorough risk assessment. Okay, to identify and prioritize the compliance risk. So if an organization is regularly updating the risk assessment, and with the change in the environment, in the regulatory landscape and the business environment, that is, I think, is the best practice, and the organization should always follow that. Ineffective communication is another pitfall, where the compliance expectations and changes that can lead to the misunderstandings and non-compliance if the communication is not happening. So there should be a clear communication plan to keep all stakeholders informed with the help of uh, training. I think training programs are the best, which can help employees understand their roles in maintaining compliance, right? So the communication is another important aspect in implementing ICF. The other thing is the continuous improvement. If an organization is failing to prioritize the continuous improvement, then they will lag behind on the ICF implementation point. So in that case, they should have and include all the feedback from audits, incidents, changes in regulation, so that their ICF is continuously improved and it is not filling back, right? Uh, Next thing is the insufficient technology integration, which says that the lack of integration with the existing technologies and systems, which can result in inefficiencies and difficulties in managing compliance. So for that, the organization should ensure that ICF is seamlessly integrated with the existing systems and technologies, and the investment in technology solutions will facilitate the automation, the monitoring, the reporting, and the documentation. So these were the few pitfalls when an organization going to implement the integrated compliance framework, and they should consider these steps which I have already discussed. All right. So now I have touched upon all the ICF concepts, the implementation approach, the case study. Now, what is the Accorian approach? So if you see Accorian, we have the in-house GRC that is called GoRICO. So GoRICO is the governor risk and compliance. The abbreviated form is GoRICO. It is a single platform solution. Okay, and this platform will give you a true secure cybersecurity compliance and the maturity posture. Okay, GoRICO will also help organization to manage and monitor multiple security programs in the integrated platform. So like I gave you the example, the automation of the software or a tool, if you're going to use, automation is the key. Okay, and with the help of automation, if the organization wants to manage a multiple compliance, they can do that. So GoRICO helps in that. It will always give you a platform where the organizations are always be audit ready. Okay, they don't have to do anything. The compliance frameworks are already there. They have to select which compliance framework they want to go for. That is another feature GoRICO provides. GoRICO also gives a full customizable solution. Like suppose the, like I told you, the compliance trend and the complexity in organization. So some organization are on premise, some are hybrid, they are also cloud native. So the GoRICO will give you a customizable solution. You can choose, and beyond automated controls, you can add the customized solution and the customized task if you want. That is another thing. The next thing what it does, it also provide a task. Like we all know in an organization, we have to have a if organization wants to be compliant, there has to be a multiple tasks which are related to the policies and procedure. For example, the access review, the password rotation. There's a frequency, like of some organization go for a quarterly, 6 monthly, annually. Okay, so the translation of those frequencies from policy procedure to the actual task and giving it to the respective stakeholders, that is one of the feature of GoRICO which provides. Okay, and at the end, if you see, it gives a comprehensive picture. Like you can see the score. If suppose an organization wants to go for a ISO certification, so ISO has a couple of domains, and there are 93 controls. So if an organization is failing in some control or maybe in some domain, it will give you a dashboard. Like you can see your overall security score at any time. So that is another feature which GoRICO provides. So I'll show you the dashboard where where we can see that these are the few screenshots which we have taken. On a dashboard standpoint, you see GoRICO provides you the vendor platform. Okay, the vendor management. You can do the vendor assessment. You can also do the audit end to end, and also the sustenance part. So in audit, it will take you from the gap assessment. So organization can do the gap assessment. Once gap assessment is done, then the remediation part, the remediation advisory, and followed by and up to the internal audit and the external audit. So it's a complete end-to-end delivery where you can have the customized product in a form which is given on the GoRICO platform. So it also provides a faster evidence collection. You can see on the top there's a task created, and each and every stakeholders can easily go and just complete the task. So for example, and it is a standardized framework. Like you don't have to add the framework again and again. One of the organization, I can give you the example, like they wanted to go for from 2013 to 2022 ISO version, right? So GoRICO already had the controls from the ISO 2013 and the evidence. So only the few things which have changed from 2013 to 2022 version, that was only captured and the audit was done. So that is a uh, USP of the GoRICO. Okay, so this was on the dashboard part. Now coming to the conclusion, this is the last slide. So I just want to summarize what we have seen, and it also relates to the GRC tool. So GoRICO, if you call out or any software tool, it should provide the ICF framework. So mapping of controls requirements from various frameworks, that is the first thing. Second, uh, GRC tools should prove and give the streamlined process, like automated evidence collection, your board reporting, your don't have to start from the fresh, and uh, like any standard, if you want to add, it can be easily accommodated on the platform. So in case a new framework you want to have on the GoRICO or any GRC tool, so it should give you the edge to start immediately. Okay. Consolidated audit, one of the feature of the ICF which GoRICO provides is the audit. It relates to the time and resources. Like once you have the audited consolidation of audits, so it means you're consolidating your efforts. You are only collecting once, like comply many and audit less. And this consolidation of effort has resulted in significant cost savings. So that is the USP of the tool. So I think this is the last one. So now before we conclude, I want to open the floor for any questions or comments from our attendees. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat and I'll do my best to address them.
So we did have a couple of questions come in. The first one here, I think you may have answered actually since the question came in through the presentation, but I'll give you the opportunity to answer again. So first one is, how do you standardize processes that have different regulatory requirements? For example, HIPAA requirements versus GDPR.
Okay, like I've already mentioned, the standardization is one of the challenge, and what organizations should do, they should have the one process, like you have asked for the HIPAA and GDPR. So HIPAA focuses on the health data, okay, the PHI data. The GDPR focuses on the privacy data, but there are some commonalities on the HIPAA and GDPR. So HIPAA will also governed by the privacy rule. So there's a privacy rule, there's a data security on a HIPAA side, and on the GDPR, there is a privacy, data privacy. So if I take the controls of all these and create a one standardized control and create a ICF, based on that controls, I can create a process, my documentation, and the implementation will govern with those standardized approach. So I think the what organization should do, they can take the ICF approach in this case, and they can formulate the standardized documentation which can cover the HIPAA and the GDPR requirement, and then go with the implementation part and the monitoring part. I think that should be the approach organization should follow.
So that kind of goes along with creating those harmonized controls as well.
Absolutely, correct? Absolutely.
So we may have time for one more question here. Can we cover the gap analysis again? It's not clear how this is performed in a structured way in an ICF environment. We may not have a time to answer this fully, but
okay,
go ahead and attempt to do that.
Okay, I'll just explain again. So gap analysis is very important part because I gave you the example of the framework. Suppose an organization is going for HIPAA, HITRUST, or SOC 2. I'll pick up another example of PCI, GDPR, and SOC 2, right? So PCI for the payment card industry, the cardholder data, GDPR is for privacy data, and SOC 2 you're for service efficiency, right? Now security, I'll take the security. So what an organization should do, they should pick up the controls from these and create a harmonized controls, and then see the implementation in the organization, what is already implemented. what controls are already implemented. So I have a set of controls, suppose 100 controls. I'm just taking a hypothetical example, and my organization has implemented 90 controls already, which may be common with these 100 or maybe different, that we have to see. Okay. So in that case, the organization should compare the harmonized controls from ICF and the controls organizations already in place. So you will come to the gap, like how many controls organizations required to implement again, how many controls are missing, which are already existing, where they need to do some changes. That will also happen. So these are the gaps which organization can identify, that can only happen if an organization have a ICF in place, maybe on the automation tool, where they can leverage the requirement of all these frameworks and compare with the actual implementation. On a tool side, I'll give you one example. So on a tool, if I take these three frameworks and take the controls of these three, and as an organization, I go and want to address, just start uploading the evidence and providing the document, I will see, okay, these are the things I have, these are the things I don't have in terms of documentation process and the control implementation. Those will be my gaps. So I think organization should follow that step.
Great.
I hope
Thank you.
that answers.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think we've about come to the time limit here.
Okay. All right. So we want to extend a heartfelt thank you to each one of you for joining us today. Your time and attention are greatly appreciated. Before we part ways, I encourage you to share your feedback with us. Your input help us improve further webinars and better serve your needs. So stay tuned for our next one. Thank you, everyone, and good day.
Thanks, everybody.